I never imagined that a secret I had carried for 7 years could unravel my entire world in a single afternoon. For a long time, I thought I was protecting everyone, especially my children. I thought keeping the truth hidden was an act of love, a shield to protect our family from pain. We lived in Kansas, a state that had been our home for over a decade. The streets were quiet, the neighborhoods familiar, and our life seemed perfect from the outside. My husband, Daniel, appeared to be the kind of man everyone admired, charming, attentive, and supportive. Our children, Emma and Lucas, brought us joy every day, the kind of happiness I thought could withstand anything. But beneath the surface, a weight grew inside me that I could no longer ignore. The secret had started long before our first child was born. I had promised myself that I would keep it hidden, believing it was temporary, that it would never have to come to light. Every day for 7 years, I lived with a tension that was both exhausting and invisible. I was careful with my words, careful with my actions, always calculating how much I could reveal without shattering the fragile peace we had. It wasn't just a lie, it was a burden that shaped every decision I made. I would wake up in the middle of the night, the secret pressing against my chest, and I would have to remind myself to breathe, to act normal, to continue my life as if nothing existed beyond the walls of our home. Our marriage had been built on trust, or so I thought. I remember the early days when we would laugh about small things, share our hopes for the future, and make plans as if the world belonged only to us. Daniel would talk about our children's future with passion, about how he wanted them to grow up strong, independent, and happy. I would smile and nod, imagining the life we would have, all while carrying a truth that contradicted every word he said. I convinced myself that I was sparing him, sparing them, from something that could only cause harm if revealed too soon. But 7 years of hiding a truth takes its toll. Every holiday, every birthday, every family gathering became a minefield of careful navigation. I could not celebrate fully, could not relax, because the secret lurked in my mind, waiting for a slip of the tongue or a careless glance. Daniel never suspected. He never asked. He was oblivious to the small inconsistencies, the times when I would avoid certain topics, the moments when I hesitated before answering a question about our finances, our past, or our extended families. I told myself it was only temporary, that someday I would find the courage to reveal the truth, but that day never came, until it could no longer be postponed. I remember the moment I realized that keeping the secret was no longer protecting anyone. It was becoming a danger to everything I valued. A series of small events had begun to pile up, each one reminding me that the time for honesty had arrived. Daniel had grown more protective, more demanding, and my children were growing older, asking questions that I could not answer without lying. The weight of the secret had started to affect my health. I would feel sudden waves of panic, shortness of breath, and a deep, gnawing anxiety whenever Daniel brought up anything related to my past, our finances, or our family histories. I realized that hiding the secret was no longer a shield, but a chain. It was in the spring, as the sun warmed our backyard and the children played under the cherry blossom tree, that I decided the secret could no longer be contained. I told myself that revealing it would be an act of courage, a necessary step to protect my children from future harm. I imagined that Daniel would understand, that he would appreciate my honesty, that together we could navigate whatever consequences might come. I imagined a future where truth would set us free. I was wrong. The confession began innocently enough, or at least I tried to make it that way. I asked Daniel to sit with me in the living room while the children played outside. The air was warm, filled with the scent of blooming flowers and freshly cut grass. I could feel my hands trembling as I spoke, the the words sticking in my throat. I tried to be calm, measured, and gentle, explaining that there was something from my past, something I had kept hidden for 7 years. I explained that I had not meant to deceive him, that I had kept the secret out of fear and love, that I had always hoped the moment would come when revealing it would be safe. I watched as his face changed, shifting from curiosity to confusion, and then to something darker, something I had not anticipated. The secret I revealed was catastrophic. I had hoped that honesty could bridge the gap, that Daniel could see my intentions, understand why I had kept the secret for so long. Instead, the moment the words left my mouth, I saw a look of shock and betrayal. I could see the trust we had built crumble in an instant. The children's laughter outside became distant, muffled by the sudden silence in the room. I realized immediately that my confession had opened a door I could never close. Daniel's reaction was swift and unforgiving. His voice, once warm and reassuring, turned sharp and accusatory. He demanded answers I could not give fast enough, details I had kept hidden for years. His anger was palpable, filling every corner of the room, leaving me feeling small and vulnerable. For the first time in our marriage, I felt truly afraid. I realized that the secret, which had felt so heavy and consuming inside me, now had the power to destroy everything in the open. I tried to explain, to show that my actions had always been motivated by love, that I had protected the family to the best of my ability. I reminded him of the years we had spent together, of the laughter and joy, of the small sacrifices I had made every day to maintain our home and care for our children. But my words were met with anger and disbelief. Daniel could not see past the betrayal he felt, and in that moment I understood the depth of the consequences I had invited by speaking the truth. After that day, our home changed. The atmosphere became tense and uncomfortable, every interaction charged with the weight of the revelation. Daniel withdrew emotionally, and our conversations became arguments. The children began to notice the strain, asking why their parents seemed upset, sensing the tension that had never existed before. I wanted to shield them from the truth, to explain in a way that would not frighten them, but the secret had already cast its shadow over our lives. I realized that the decision to reveal the secret had consequences I could not control. My marriage, which had been stable and secure for a decade, began to fracture under the weight of distrust and anger. Daniel's perception of me changed. The woman he had trusted implicitly for 7 years was now someone he saw as deceitful, someone who had hidden a critical part of her life. The house that had once felt like a sanctuary became a place of tension and fear. I felt the sting of regret, the bitter realization that some truths once revealed cannot be taken back. In the weeks that followed, the tension escalated. Daniel became more controlling and distant, and I could sense the growing resentment in every glance, every word. He began to speak of our future differently, questioning decisions that had never been questioned before. The emotional distance between us widened, leaving me feeling isolated and unsupported. The secret, once a burden only I carried, had now become a wedge between us, changing the dynamics of our relationship irreversibly. I sought advice from friends and family, but I found that sharing the secret with anyone outside the marriage was impossible. I could not bear the judgment, the pity, or the potential for further betrayal. Each day I carried the consequences silently, trying to maintain normalcy for the children while navigating a marriage that had been fundamentally altered by a single confession. I realized that the truth, while necessary for my conscience, had initiated a chain of events that I could not predict or control. The legal and financial implications began to surface slowly. Daniel started discussing custody arrangements and the potential for involving lawyers. The home that had been filled with laughter and love now became a battleground. Each conversation a negotiation, each silence a measure of the growing divide. I felt trapped between my desire to protect my children and the reality that my marriage might not survive the revelation. The mornings became the hardest. I would wake before the children, my mind racing with what I had revealed and how it would reshape our lives. I tried to make breakfast, get the kids ready for school, and maintain the illusion of normalcy, but every small interaction reminded me of the change in Daniel. He no longer smiled in the same way at my efforts, and the subtle warmth we had shared vanished. I noticed the way he avoided eye contact, the way he spoke more curtly, and the way he began keeping secrets of his own, perhaps to regain control of the life I had disrupted. I began keeping a journal to cope, writing down the moments when I felt trapped or misunderstood, detailing the conversations that left me trembling. I would write about my love for my children, my hope that one day they would understand why I had carried the secret for so long. Each entry was a lifeline, a way to process the tension and fear that had infiltrated my home. Writing allowed me to confront the consequences of my confession without shouting or arguing, without creating more distance between Daniel and me. Even before the revelation, our home had been a careful balance of responsibilities and routines. I managed schedules, doctor's appointments, and school projects while ensuring Daniel had space to relax after long work days. After revealing the secret, these routines became a battleground. Every question I asked, every suggestion I made was met with suspicion or irritation. Even small disagreements felt monumental, as though the foundation of trust we had built over 10 years had crumbled into dust. I realized that the secret, while hidden for my protection, had become a weapon in Daniel's perception of me, a justification for anger and control. The children sensed the tension long before I was ready to acknowledge it. Emma, my oldest, would sometimes hesitate at the breakfast table, glancing nervously at Daniel and then at me. Lucas, still young, became clingier, sensing that something had changed, even if he did not understand exactly what. Their innocence was fragile, and I felt the crushing weight of guilt that my actions, though intended to protect them in the long run, had created fear and confusion in their world. I knew I had to be careful in how I approached them, how I explained the changes in our household. I could not undo the revelation, but I could shield them from the emotional fallout as much as possible. Daniel began questioning every decision I had ever made. He asked about finances, about events in our past, and about interactions I had had with friends and family. He dissected my words, searching for inconsistencies, looking for any sign that I had misled him further. It was exhausting to live under such scrutiny, and I realized that my marriage had shifted from a partnership to a trial in which every action and word could be interpreted as evidence against me. I longed for the days before the confession, when love and trust guided our decisions rather than suspicion and betrayal. As days turned into weeks, the arguments escalated. What began as tense conversations became shouting matches. I would try to explain my reasoning, my intention to protect our family, but Daniel's anger made it impossible to communicate calmly. I felt the walls of our home closing in, turning what had been a place of comfort into a prison of emotional turbulence. I began to retreat inwardly, conserving my energy and focusing on the children, trying to shield them from the storm that had erupted. One evening I realized that the emotional distance between Daniel and me had become almost physical. We would sit in the same room, eating dinner, yet barely speak beyond necessary words. The silence was heavy, loaded with unspoken accusations and lingering resentment. I felt a profound loneliness, surrounded by the very family I had worked so hard to protect. I began to question my own judgment, wondering if the truth, though necessary, had been worth the devastation it caused. I tried seeking guidance from friends I trusted, people who knew me well and understood the pressures of marriage and parenthood. I carefully framed the situation without revealing the secret in its entirety, hoping for advice on how to navigate Daniel's anger and rebuild trust. Their counsel was limited. They could sympathize with my position, but they could not undo the damage or provide solutions for regaining the life we had lost. I realized that this was a path I had to walk alone, balancing the need for honesty with the need for survival. The secret itself weighed heavily on my conscience. It was not a trivial matter, not something that could be brushed aside or minimized. It affected the very core of our family life, the foundation on which our home had been built. I had hoped that by revealing it, I could foster a relationship of openness and honesty, but I underestimated how deeply Daniel's perception of betrayal would impact him. In his eyes, 7 years of concealment was a deliberate act of deception, a reflection of my character rather than a measure of caution and love. I also began noticing subtle changes in Daniel's interactions with our children. He became more controlling, monitoring their activities and decisions, questioning their choices in ways he had never done before. I realized that the secret had altered not only our marriage, but the entire family dynamic. The children were growing up in an environment tinged with tension and mistrust, and I felt a sharp pain knowing that my attempt to be truthful had unintended consequences. Even in moments when Daniel seemed calm, there was an underlying tension that could erupt at any time. I became hyper-aware of my words, my tone, and my gestures, knowing that any misstep could reignite the anger and distrust that now governed our household. It was exhausting, both mentally and emotionally, to navigate each day with such vigilance. I longed for the simplicity of the past, when I could act freely, when my actions were not constantly scrutinized. I began documenting everything meticulously. Each conversation, each argument, each interaction that highlighted the change in our marriage and family dynamic. I knew that eventually this documentation might be necessary to protect myself, especially if the situation escalated to legal action. I recorded dates, times, and details, knowing that one day this record could serve as evidence of the impact of my confession and the resulting family instability. I also noticed my own behavior shifting. I became more cautious, more withdrawn, more strategic in how I presented myself in every interaction with Daniel. I realized that the secret, though revealed, continued to shape my life, dictating my choices and influencing my behavior. I had thought that truth would liberate me, but instead it created a new reality in which I had to navigate the consequences carefully and deliberately. The emotional toll was immense. I experienced sleepless nights filled with worry, anxiety, and fear of what the future would hold. I questioned my judgment constantly, wondering if I should have remained silent, if the preservation of peace and routine would have been worth the compromise of honesty. But deep down, I knew that living a life built on deception, even if intended for protection, was not sustainable. The revelation was painful but necessary, and I had to live with the consequences. After the confession, every morning felt like stepping into a battlefield. Even the simplest tasks, making coffee, waking the children, folding laundry, were layered with an unspoken tension that hung over our home like a storm cloud. Daniel's eyes no longer held warmth. They scanned me with suspicion, as if every move, every word could confirm a deeper betrayal. I had revealed my secret hoping for relief, hoping to rebuild honesty in our marriage, but instead I had opened the door to fear, anger, and distrust. The children noticed, too. Emma began to ask questions that I wasn't ready to answer. Her small voice, tinged with worry, would ask why Daddy looked upset, why Mommy seemed sad, and why the house felt different. Lucas, though younger, sensed the tension as well. He clung to me more at bedtime, asking to stay in my room longer, seeking the comfort that had once been effortless in our home. Each request for reassurance tore at my heart, knowing that my attempt at honesty had inadvertently unsettled their world. I found myself walking on eggshells throughout the day. Even casual remarks from Daniel could spiral into hours of arguments or icy silence. I learned quickly which topics to avoid, which words to soften, and how to phrase even the most innocent comments to prevent confrontation. The secret I had kept for 7 years now dictated my every action, even in its revelation. I had thought that truth would free me, but in reality it chained me to a new set of rules, ones I had to navigate with extreme care. Financial discussions became particularly fraught. Before the confession, Daniel trusted me with our household budgeting, our savings, and the management of the children's school expenses. Now every expense was scrutinized, every bank statement questioned. I felt like I had to defend every dollar I had spent, even though nothing had changed. The years of trust that had built a foundation for our marriage crumbled under the weight of suspicion, and our home became a constant negotiation of power, control, and fear. Social gatherings also became a minefield. Friends and relatives who once visited freely now hesitated, unsure how to navigate the tension that had enveloped our home. I noticed the subtle changes, the way guests glanced at Daniel before speaking, the cautious smiles, the measured conversations. I realized that our family life had become public theater, with my secret now influencing every interaction outside our walls. The isolation grew heavier with each passing day as I tried to shield the children from the fallout while managing my own fear. Sleep became a rare commodity. Night after night, I would lie awake, replaying the moment I confessed and imagining how the coming months would unfold. Would Daniel forgive me? Would he understand why I kept the secret for so long? Or would this revelation continue to fester, leading to permanent damage to our family? I could not answer these questions, and the uncertainty gnawed at me, leaving me exhausted yet unable to rest. Even routine activities like grocery shopping or picking up the children from school became exercises in careful observation and strategic communication. I began noticing the way Daniel held himself, the tone in his voice, the subtle tension in his posture. Every interaction became a potential trigger, every misstep a possible argument. I had not anticipated that revealing a long-held secret could so radically alter the rhythm of daily life. I also began reflecting on the past 7 years in a new light. I replayed moments when I could have shared the truth sooner, wondering if I had delayed too long. Each memory was now tinged with regret, not just for the burden of secrecy, but for the cost it had imposed on our relationship. I understood intellectually that I had acted out of love and protection, but emotionally the consequences were undeniable. My marriage, once a source of comfort and security, had become a minefield of mistrust and suspicion. The children, innocent and unaware of the full complexity, still felt the change. Emma asked questions about why her father seemed angry more often, why bedtime stories were shorter, and why our family dinners were so quiet. Lucas, sensing the tension, became clingier and more hesitant to leave my side. I tried to reassure them, telling them that Mommy and Daddy still loved them, but I knew that words alone could not erase the subtle shifts in behavior and the emotional distance that had grown. I sought solace wherever I could find it. Quiet moments alone in the kitchen, journaling my thoughts, became my sanctuary. I wrote down every detail of the confession, every conversation with Daniel, every small victory in maintaining calm. Writing helped me process my emotions, but it could not change the reality of our altered family dynamic. I realized that the secret, once revealed, had set in motion a chain of events that would take years to untangle if it could ever be fully resolved. In the evenings, I would sit with the children, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy. Bedtime routines became rituals of comfort, a way to preserve some stability in the midst of chaos. I read stories, sang songs, and held them close, hoping to shield them from the tension that had seeped into every corner of our home. I wanted them to feel safe, to understand that the world was not entirely changed, even if our family dynamics were. I also began noticing subtle changes in my own behavior. I became more cautious, more deliberate in my actions, and more strategic in my words. I realized that my confession, while necessary, had shifted the balance of power in our household. I had to navigate carefully, maintaining my dignity and protecting the children while also managing Daniel's anger and distrust. Each day became a negotiation, a careful dance of communication and restraint. I attempted to reach out to close friends for guidance, carefully framing the situation without revealing the full nature of the secret. Their advice was sympathetic but limited. They could not undo the emotional fallout or provide solutions for regaining trust. I understood that this was a path I had to walk alone, balancing the need for honesty with the need for stability and protection of my children. Even routine family events became challenging. Holidays, birthdays, and social gatherings were colored by the undercurrent of tension. I noticed how Daniel's interactions with extended family changed, how he questioned details of my past actions, and how he monitored the children more closely. The environment I had once taken for granted as loving and supportive now felt fragile and tense, requiring constant vigilance. I began preparing myself for the possibility that the revelation might permanently alter my life. I thought about legal implications, the potential for custody disputes, and the need to document interactions in case the situation escalated. The fear of losing my children became a constant presence, shadowing every decision and every conversation. I knew that my confession, though honest and necessary, had set off a chain reaction with consequences I could not fully control. Even in moments of calm, the weight of the secret and its revelation lingered. I found myself second-guessing decisions, analyzing past actions, and anticipating future conflicts. The sense of loss was pervasive, touching every aspect of daily life. I realized that honesty, while morally right, had irrevocably altered the landscape of my family and my marriage. The trust that once existed had been fractured, leaving behind a delicate and precarious reality that I had to navigate with care. I also began considering the long-term impact on my children. I worried about how they would process the changes in their family, how they would view their parents, and what lessons they would take away from this experience. I wanted them to understand that honesty and integrity were important, but I feared that the cost of truth had been too high for them to see the value clearly. As weeks passed, the household settled into a tense routine. The children adjusted as best they could, finding small pockets of normalcy in their school and social activities. Daniel and I maintained a fragile coexistence, communicating only when necessary and carefully navigating potential conflicts. I realized that the revelation of my secret had permanently altered our dynamic, creating a new reality in which trust had to be rebuilt slowly, if at all. In reflecting on the past 7 years and the confession that changed everything, I understood that secrets, even when kept out of love or protection, carry a heavy burden. The decision to reveal the truth was painful but necessary, and it set in motion a series of events that reshaped my family, my marriage, and my role as a parent. The emotional weight of these choices would stay with me, guiding my actions and shaping my future interactions with my children and with Daniel. The morning I decided to finally tell Daniel the truth, my heart felt like it was beating in my throat. I had rehearsed my words countless times in my mind, imagining every possible reaction. I had imagined anger, shock, tears, even disbelief, but nothing could have prepared me for the intensity of what actually happened. I chose the quiet of our kitchen, hoping the children were safely at school so that this confession would be private. I needed privacy to try to control the narrative, to maintain some semblance of composure as I unveiled 7 years of hidden truth. The secret weighed on me heavily. For years I had carried it alone, meticulously guarding it from Daniel while trying to maintain the illusion of a perfect family. The secret wasn't trivial, it struck at the core of our marriage and our children's lives. I had hoped that by sharing it now, I could finally lift this burden, cleanse my conscience, and create an opportunity for real honesty in our relationship. But as soon as the words left my mouth, a chilling silence filled the kitchen. Daniel froze, his expression unreadable at first. Then slowly shock turned to disbelief, and disbelief turned to anger. I watched as the man I had trusted for a decade transformed before my eyes. His hands clenched into fists, his jaw tightened, and I felt the room shrink as his presence became overwhelming. The air itself seemed charged with tension. The moment of confession, which I had imagined as potentially healing, became the catalyst for fear and dread. He questioned me with sharp, cutting words, interrogating every detail of the secret, every moment I had kept it from him. I tried to explain my reasons, my desire to protect him and our children, but my words only seemed to fuel his fury. He accused me of betrayal, of deception, of ruining our family. His anger was palpable, radiating outward and filling every corner of the room. I could feel the power shift. For the first time in years, I realized how little control I truly had over our lives once this truth came to light. The argument escalated quickly. What began as a verbal confrontation soon turned into physical intimidation. Daniel grabbed my arm, his grip tight and unforgiving. My pulse raced, my breath caught, and I realized with a sinking sense of dread that I was facing something far beyond a marital disagreement. I had anticipated anger, but I had not anticipated violence, and the realization left me trembling. Every instinct screamed to flee, but the kitchen's confines and the suddenness of his actions left me frozen. As he continued to berate me, I began documenting everything in my mind. I knew that this confrontation could escalate further, and I needed to have a clear recollection of events for any future legal action. Every word he said, every movement he made, I etched into my memory. I had learned over the years that if there was ever a moment I needed to protect myself legally, the details had to be precise, indisputable, and fully recorded. Finally, I found a sliver of opportunity to escape. As Daniel's attention briefly shifted, I pulled away and rushed toward the front door. My hands shook violently as I fumbled with the lock, my mind racing with fear and urgency. I knew I had to get out, had to put distance between us before the situation became irreversible. The children's well-being and my own safety depended on it. I drove to the nearest medical clinic, my hands still trembling, my heart pounding, my mind replaying every moment. The doctor immediately understood the urgency of my situation. Physical evidence of the confrontation, bruising on my arms, red marks around my neck, a surge of adrenaline still visible in my demeanor, was documented meticulously. I was advised to file a police report and obtain a protective order, both to safeguard myself and to establish a legal record of the domestic assault. Returning home to pack essentials felt surreal. I moved through our rooms silently, gathering only what I could carry in my arms. Clothes, identification, and the children's school records were prioritized. Every object I touched reminded me of the life we had shared, the home we had built, the memories we had created, the routine that had once seemed so stable. Each item was now a testament to the fragility of our domestic life, a reminder that the secret I had revealed had set into motion irreversible change. The police report was the first formal step in what would become an extended legal struggle. I recounted the events in painstaking detail, providing both the medical documentation and my personal account. The officer noted the severity of the assault and advised me on the procedures for a temporary protective order. I learned that this was just the beginning. The legal system would now be involved, and every action I took would have long-term implications for custody, property, and personal safety. Securing the temporary protective order was both a relief and a stark reminder of the new reality I faced. Daniel was now legally restricted from contacting me or the children, and I was forced to confront the fact that the marriage I had invested so deeply in was effectively over. The protective order provided safety, but it also highlighted the profound rupture that had occurred. I understood that this was not just a temporary setback. It was a life-altering shift that would shape the coming months, perhaps years, of our lives. The next challenge was the legal custody battle. Daniel immediately sought to leverage the situation to his advantage. He portrayed me as unstable, unreliable, and reckless, arguing that the revelation of the secret was proof of my unfitness as a primary caregiver. I had anticipated resistance, but the intensity of his claims shocked me. The courtroom would now be the stage for our family drama, and I had to arm myself with evidence, witnesses, and a clear narrative to protect my rights and the well-being of the children. I began compiling a detailed record of the past 7 years. Every instance of responsible parenting, every decision that prioritized the children's safety and well-being was documented. I gathered testimony from teachers, pediatricians, and close family friends. Each statement was a piece of armor, a way to counter the accusations and establish a consistent factual record of my dedication as a parent. At the same time, I had to navigate my own emotional turmoil. Guilt, fear, and anxiety intertwined with determination and resolve. The secret I had revealed was at the center of this storm, but the response, the violence and the legal assault, was the catalyst for a broader struggle. I had to maintain clarity, composure, and focus even as my life was fractured by the consequences of truth. Court dates loomed, each bringing renewed stress. The legal process moved slowly, requiring repeated documentation, interviews, and hearings. Each session forced me to relive the trauma of that morning, to recount details of the assault, and to defend my actions in revealing the secret. It was emotionally exhausting, yet necessary. I knew that the outcome of these proceedings would determine not just my freedom, but my ongoing relationship with my children. Daniel's legal team attempted to discredit me, highlighting past mistakes, questioning my judgment, and painting the revelation as a reckless act. I countered by presenting evidence of the years of careful secrecy, emphasizing that my intentions had been protective, not malicious. The distinction was crucial. My goal had been honesty and the preservation of long-term trust, not harm. The court needed to understand that context, and I worked tirelessly to ensure it did. The children's lives were deeply affected. They struggled with understanding why their parents were now in conflict, why our family routine had fractured, and why their mother and father were no longer on amicable terms. I sought to maintain stability, keeping consistent school routines, extracurricular activities, and emotional support. I spoke to counselors to help the children process the upheaval and to provide guidance for navigating the emotional landscape of a fractured home. Meanwhile, I also had to confront the broader social consequences. Friends and extended family became divided. Some supported me, understanding the gravity of the secret and the abuse, while others sided with Daniel, questioning my judgment and painting me as the instigator of the family's collapse. I realized that revealing a secret of this magnitude did not just affect my immediate household, it rippled outward, altering relationships, perceptions, and alliances across our social network. Amid all this, I reflected constantly on the secret itself. Could I have handled it differently? Could I have anticipated the violent response? The answers were elusive, but I concluded that honesty, though painful, was necessary. Keeping the secret for 7 more years would have only deepened the potential for betrayal if discovered later. The act of confession, while catastrophic, was ultimately an attempt to confront reality rather than live a lie indefinitely. The legal process extended for months. Each hearing required preparation, review of evidence, and coordination with attorneys. I meticulously tracked every interaction, every attempt at communication, and every incident of intimidation or control. This documentation became essential not only for the custody proceedings, but also for establishing the credibility of my actions and the necessity of the protective measures in place. I also had to navigate my own sense of identity. The secret had defined a significant portion of my life, and its revelation forced me to redefine who I was in the context of my family, my marriage, and my role as a parent. I grappled with guilt, shame, and grief, but also with resilience, determination, and the knowledge that I had taken necessary steps to protect myself and my children. After the initial shock of the confession, the days that followed became a blur of fear, anxiety, and meticulous planning. I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house, every unexpected sound outside set my nerves on edge. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, constantly scanning for any sign that Daniel might attempt to confront me again. The fear wasn't just for myself. It was for the children. I knew that if Daniel reacted violently again, their safety would be at risk, and I had to be prepared to act immediately. I spent hours documenting every detail of what had happened. I wrote down the exact words he had said during the confrontation, the way he had moved toward me, the pressure of his hands as he grabbed my arm, and the bruising that had developed in the aftermath. I took photographs of the marks, capturing them from multiple angles with timestamps whenever possible. I felt a strange mix of shame and urgency. Shame for the intimate invasion of violence, but urgency because I knew this evidence could be vital in court. The legal system became my new reality. Filing the police report was one of the first steps, but it came with its own emotional toll. Recounting the assault to the officers required me to relive every moment, every second of fear and helplessness. I explained the history of our marriage, the years of maintaining the secret, and how the revelation had triggered his violent response. The officers listened attentively, asking clarifying questions, taking notes, and advising me on the protective measures available. Securing a temporary protective order was a relief, but it also made the situation painfully real. Daniel was legally barred from contacting me, and I had to confront the reality that our marriage, which had once seemed stable, was effectively over. The children were now caught in the middle of a fractured family, and I had to navigate their emotions with care. I made arrangements for school pickups, extracurricular activities, and daily routines, ensuring that they would not feel the full weight of the chaos around them. While the protective order provided immediate safety, it did not prevent Daniel from mobilizing his legal team to challenge my actions. He quickly filed for custody, portraying me as unstable, reckless, and unfit as a primary caregiver. His attorneys argued that the revelation of the secret was proof of poor judgment and that I had disrupted the children's sense of stability. I knew I had to act decisively to counter these claims. I began compiling extensive documentation to support my case. Every incident of responsible parenting, every decision that prioritized the children's well-being was recorded in detail. I gathered statements from teachers who had witnessed my commitment to the children's education, from pediatricians who could attest to my attentiveness to their health, and from close family friends who understood the context of the secret and my reasons for keeping it. Each piece of evidence became a shield against the accusations leveled by Daniel and his legal team. At the same time, I had to maintain my own emotional stability. The combination of fear, guilt, and anxiety was overwhelming. I sought therapy to process the trauma, learning strategies to cope with the stress, and maintain clarity during the legal proceedings. My therapist helped me understand that my decision to reveal the secret, though it had triggered chaos, was a necessary step in reclaiming my integrity and establishing a foundation for honesty moving forward. The courtroom became the stage for the unfolding drama. Each hearing required meticulous preparation. I reviewed evidence with my attorney, rehearsed responses to potential questions, and strategized how to present my case in a way that would resonate with the judge. Every document, every witness statement, and every piece of photographic evidence was carefully organized. I knew that any lapse in preparation could be exploited by Daniel's team, potentially undermining my credibility and affecting the outcome of custody decisions. Daniel's legal strategy was aggressive. He sought to portray me as the instigator of the family's collapse, emphasizing the shock and disruption caused by the revelation of the secret. He argued that my actions had destabilized the children's environment and that my behavior reflected poor judgment and irresponsibility. His attorney scrutinized every aspect of my life, searching for weaknesses, inconsistencies, or any evidence that could be used against me. In response, I weaponized the very secret that had triggered the conflict. I framed it within the context of protection, long-term thinking, and moral obligation. I explained that the secrecy was maintained to prevent harm, to shield the children from unnecessary confusion, and to preserve family stability for as long as possible. The revelation was not reckless. It was a calculated act of honesty at a moment when I could no longer bear the burden of deception. Throughout this process, I learned the importance of meticulous record keeping. Every interaction with Daniel, every attempt at communication, every sign of aggression or manipulation was documented. I maintained a detailed journal, noting dates, times, and specific behaviors. This documentation would later serve as critical evidence in demonstrating a pattern of controlling and abusive behavior, countering the narrative that I was solely responsible for the family's disruption. The emotional toll of these months was immense. I felt isolated, often questioning my decisions, wondering if the revelation had been worth the cost. Friends and family were divided. Some offered support and validation, while others criticized my choice, arguing that the secret should have remained hidden. I had to navigate these relationships carefully, recognizing that while I needed guidance and emotional support, the ultimate responsibility for protecting myself and my children rested solely with me. The children's reactions were another layer of complexity. They were confused, scared, and struggling to understand the sudden change in their lives. I focused on maintaining stability, keeping routines consistent, and providing emotional reassurance. I sought professional counseling for them, helping them process their feelings and navigate the complex emotions surrounding the breakdown of the family unit. As the legal proceedings continued, I became increasingly aware of the power dynamics at play. Daniel's ability to influence opinions, present arguments, and mobilize resources contrasted sharply with my position. I had to be strategic, deliberate, and unwavering in my approach. Each decision carried weight, and any misstep could have severe consequences for custody, visitation, and the ongoing legal battle. I also had to contend with my own internal conflicts. The guilt of revealing the secret, the fear of losing my children, and the stress of the legal process created a constant undercurrent of anxiety. Yet I reminded myself that honesty, even at great personal cost, was necessary. The alternative, continued secrecy, ongoing deception, and living under the shadow of unspoken truths, was unsustainable and morally untenable. Throughout the months, I developed a routine to manage the chaos. Mornings were devoted to the children and their schooling, afternoons to legal preparations and documentation, and evenings to reflection, therapy, and self-care. This structure provided a semblance of control in a situation that often felt uncontrollable. It allowed me to maintain focus, preserve my mental health, and continue advocating for my rights as a parent. Witness preparation became a critical aspect of the legal strategy. I met with teachers, pediatricians, and close family friends to ensure they were prepared to testify accurately and effectively. We discussed the context of the secret, the impact of its revelation, and the observable behaviors that demonstrated my consistent care and commitment to the children. Each witness was briefed on the importance of factual, detailed testimony and the need to counter the narrative presented by Daniel's legal team. As hearings progressed, the tension escalated. Daniel continued to push aggressive motions, challenging every aspect of the temporary arrangements, questioning my credibility, and attempting to limit my access to the children. Each hearing required careful navigation, a balance of assertiveness and composure, and constant coordination with my attorney. I learned to anticipate tactics, prepare responses, and remain steadfast in the face of intimidation and opposition. Financial considerations added another layer of stress. The cost of legal representation, therapy, and daily living expenses placed a significant burden on me. I had to budget carefully, prioritize expenditures, and make difficult decisions about resource allocation. Despite these challenges, I remained committed to ensuring that the children's needs were met and that my legal strategy remained uncompromised. Throughout this period, I reflected constantly on the secret itself. I considered alternative courses of action, potential consequences, and the ripple effects on the family. I realized that while the revelation had caused immediate chaos, it had also provided a foundation for rebuilding on honesty and integrity. Living a lie for an additional 7 years could have resulted in even greater damage, eroding trust and perpetuating instability. By the time the case approached critical hearings, I had compiled a comprehensive dossier of evidence, witness statements, and legal arguments. The case was no longer just about the secret. It was about my ability to parent responsibly, maintain stability, and protect the children from an environment that had become increasingly toxic and unpredictable. After weeks of gathering evidence and preparing for court, the tension at home became almost unbearable. Every sound in the house, every unexpected movement, set my nerves on edge. I became acutely aware of Daniel's presence even when he was not in the room. The fear that he might attempt to intimidate me, to manipulate the situation further, or worse, act out violently, was a constant shadow over my daily life. I couldn't relax, couldn't think of anything else. Even simple tasks like cooking or doing laundry became exercises in vigilance. I realized I needed to be methodical. Chaos could not dictate my actions if I wanted to protect my children and myself. Each morning began with a mental review of what needed to be done. check the children's schedules, prepare legal documents, respond to attorney requests, and review evidence. This structured approach helped me regain some sense of control, but the emotional weight never truly lifted. Daniel's behavior became increasingly unpredictable. Small disagreements escalated quickly into shouting matches, and I often found him monitoring my every move, questioning where I had been or who I had spoken to. I learned to document these encounters as well, noting exact words, times, and the context. These details would later become crucial in demonstrating a pattern of intimidation and emotional abuse, reinforcing the necessity of the protective order. The legal preparations were exhausting. Hours were spent reviewing court rules, organizing documents, and consulting with my attorney on the best strategy to present the case. I had to anticipate every angle Daniel's legal team might exploit, which meant scrutinizing my own actions over the past 7 years for anything that could be construed against me. The process was mentally draining, but I knew thorough preparation was the only way to ensure my children's safety and to maintain some semblance of justice. Therapy became a lifeline. The sessions provided a space to process the overwhelming guilt, fear, and anxiety. I explored why I had kept the secret for 7 years, the weight of that decision, and the impact of its revelation. The therapist helped me see that the secret, while harmful in the long run, had been a choice born of protection and love. Understanding this gave me a measure of self-compassion, which was vital in maintaining resilience amid the legal and emotional storms. The children's confusion and sadness were the hardest to witness. They struggled to reconcile the image of their father with the man who became angry and aggressive after learning the secret. I tried to shield them from the worst of the conflict, maintaining routines and reassuring them that they were loved and safe. Professional counseling for the children was essential, providing them with a safe environment to express their feelings and ask questions they didn't feel comfortable asking at home. As court dates approached, the tension escalated. Daniel's team filed motions questioning my stability, my judgment, and my ability to maintain a healthy environment for the children. They emphasized the shock of the revelation and portrayed it as evidence that I was unfit to make responsible decisions. Each allegation felt like a personal attack, and I had to fight to remain composed while ensuring every counterpoint was well documented and presented. I devoted long hours to gathering witness statements. Teachers, pediatricians, and close family friends provided detailed accounts of my consistent care, responsible decision-making, and dedication to the children's well-being. These statements were carefully framed to show that the revelation of the secret did not define my parenting, but rather that my actions had always been guided by love and responsibility. Each statement was cross-referenced with other evidence to build a cohesive, credible case. Financial preparations were another major concern. The legal process was expensive, and I needed to ensure that I could continue to support the children and maintain access to necessary services. Budgeting became a meticulous task, balancing immediate needs like childcare and therapy with the long-term costs of ongoing legal representation. Every decision had to be strategic, ensuring that I could sustain the fight without compromising the children's well-being. Daniel continued to manipulate situations to his advantage. He would attempt to provoke emotional reactions during interactions, hoping to gather evidence that could be used against me in court. I learned to recognize these tactics and respond calmly, never allowing his provocations to derail my composure or credibility. Each interaction was documented, noting not only his words and actions, but also the context and potential impact on the children. The tension within the family extended beyond the immediate household. Friends and relatives took sides, offering advice that was often contradictory and emotionally charged. I had to navigate these relationships carefully, protecting myself and my children from added stress while maintaining support where it was constructive. The challenge was to discern between helpful guidance and harmful interference, ensuring that my decisions remained focused on safety, legal strategy, and the children's needs. I also began preparing for the possibility of long-term changes in custody arrangements. Discussions with my attorney included scenarios ranging from joint custody with strict oversight to sole custody with controlled visitation. Each scenario required a careful assessment of evidence, potential outcomes, and strategies to protect the children's best interests. The reality that our family dynamic could be permanently altered was difficult to accept, but planning for every possibility allowed me to feel more in control. As hearings continued, the court became a place of intense scrutiny. Daniel's team was relentless, challenging every piece of evidence, questioning every witness, and attempting to undermine my credibility. I learned to anticipate their tactics, preparing responses, cross-references, and additional documentation to counter each challenge. The process was exhausting, but each preparation strengthened my position and reinforced the importance of a systematic, disciplined approach. I also worked to maintain a sense of normalcy for the children amid the chaos. School routines, extracurricular activities, and daily family interactions were prioritized, providing them with stability and reassurance. I became their anchor, demonstrating resilience, calm, and consistency despite the upheaval in our lives. It was a constant balancing act, juggling the demands of legal strategy, emotional care, and practical responsibilities. The mounting stress revealed the depth of emotional exhaustion I had been carrying for years. Nights were often sleepless, filled with anxiety over court dates, potential confrontations, and the uncertain future. I learned coping strategies, including structured journaling, mindfulness exercises, and scheduled breaks to manage the intensity of the situation. These practices became essential tools to maintain mental clarity, emotional stability, and the ability to make sound decisions under pressure. During this time, I also began to reflect deeply on the 7-year secret itself. I revisited my decision to keep it hidden, analyzing my motivations, fears, and the potential consequences. I realized that while the revelation had caused immediate disruption, maintaining secrecy would have only prolonged the stress and potential harm. This reflection strengthened my resolve, reinforcing that my actions, though difficult, were grounded in integrity and concern for long-term honesty. The preparation for the upcoming hearings became a daily ritual. Every morning I reviewed evidence, anticipated questions, and rehearsed testimony. Each interaction with the children, each discussion with witnesses, and each exchange with Daniel was carefully considered for its potential impact. The intensity of the process required unwavering focus, emotional control, and a commitment to thorough preparation. As the hearings drew closer, I felt a mixture of apprehension and determination. The stakes were higher than ever. The custody of my children, the validation of my decisions, and the protection of my rights as a parent depended on the careful presentation of evidence and the strategic framing of the narrative. Each day reinforced the gravity of the situation, the importance of preparedness, and the necessity of unwavering commitment to my children's well-being. The courtroom seemed impossibly vast as I stepped inside, my hands shaking slightly, clutching the folders of evidence I had prepared over weeks. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, mingled with the tension of everyone waiting for the proceedings to begin. I felt as though every eye in the room was on me, though I tried to focus solely on the judge and the files in my hands. My heart thudded loudly in my chest, each beat reminding me of the stakes, the custody of my children, the security of their future, and the fragile remnants of my family life. When the judge called the case, a hush fell over the room. Daniel's attorney rose first, speaking in measured tones that dripped with accusation and concern. They painted me as reckless, irresponsible, and emotionally unstable. They emphasized the shock my revelation had caused, the way I had upended what Daniel claimed was a carefully balanced home life. I sat quietly, my palms sweaty, trying not to let their words pierce the calm I had been carefully cultivating for months. I had spent weeks preparing my defense, not just for myself, but for my children. Every document I held, every note from a teacher or counselor, every medical record was intended to illustrate my consistent care and unwavering attention to their needs. I knew that the court would see my confession as a breach of trust, and I had to carefully show that my actions, though painful and revealing, were done out of a desperate need to protect the children from hidden instability. When my turn came, I rose slowly, feeling the weight of the courtroom settle on my shoulders. I began by recounting the tenets of our life before the revelation. I spoke of routine mornings filled with school lunches, homework, and bedtime stories. I reminded the court of birthdays celebrated with careful planning, of late nights spent comforting sick children, and of weekends filled with soccer games and family outings. These details were not just stories, they were proof that despite the secret I had held, I had remained committed to my children's well-being in every tangible way. I described the secret itself in measured terms, carefully avoiding unnecessary drama while making sure to convey its significance. I explained why I had felt compelled to reveal it after 7 years, how the weight of deception had grown unbearable, and how I had reached a point where honesty, however painful, was necessary for the family's long-term integrity. I spoke of the anxiety that had plagued me for years, the sleepless nights, and the constant internal calculations about what to say, what to hide, and what consequences might follow. I recounted the exact moment of the confession, the room in our home where it took place, the expressions on the faces of my children as they listened, and Daniel's immediate reaction. I emphasized that the shock was directed entirely at me, that the betrayal he felt had been magnified by years of secrecy that I had carried alone. I described the emotional turmoil, the rising panic, and the way I had struggled to remain calm while explaining myself. I presented evidence of my long-term parenting stability, letters from teachers, school counselors, and pediatricians. I included notes documenting my children's emotional health, academic progress, and overall well-being. Each page, each signature, each observation was meant to reinforce that my secret had not compromised my role as a parent, and that my decision to reveal it, though dangerous, had been executed with careful thought for their welfare. Daniel's attorney attempted to interrupt several times, claiming my actions were selfish and reckless. But I held my composure. I responded calmly, acknowledging the emotional impact on Daniel, but emphasizing that my primary responsibility had always been to the children. I explained that my decision to speak the truth had not been arbitrary. It had been a measured response to years of hidden strain, designed to establish transparency and stability for their future. The judge listened attentively, occasionally taking notes and asking clarifying questions. Each time I answered with honesty without defensiveness, making sure to portray both my human vulnerability and my consistent responsibility. I shared examples of daily routines, of how I had managed the household, and of the small but critical decisions that had maintained the children's normalcy despite the burden of secrecy. When the judge asked about Daniel's behavior after the revelation, I provided detailed accounts of his anger, his withdrawal, and his actions that undermined the household's stability. I spoke of heated arguments, of emotional manipulations, and of the increasingly hostile environment that had developed. I carefully framed these details to show that my confession was a catalyst revealing pre-existing instability, not the sole cause of it. I also addressed the financial aspects of our household. I showed that I had managed bills, school expenses, and extracurricular activities diligently. I provided statements and receipts, illustrating that the home remained secure and that the children's needs had been consistently met. This was crucial. I needed the court to see that despite the secret, my actions had never endangered the family's material or emotional stability. As I spoke, I felt the weight of the years lift slightly. Each fact, each document, each testimony reinforced the reality that I had done everything within my power to safeguard the children's lives. I spoke of the emotional toll, the fear that my confession would irreparably damage the family, and the slow realization that honesty, though painful, was ultimately the only path toward integrity and accountability. The children were present for part of the hearing, sitting quietly with their father at his side. Their expressions were a mixture of confusion and curiosity, and I could feel their silent observation. I spoke carefully, knowing that my words would not only influence the judge, but also resonate deeply with them. I wanted them to understand that my decision, though difficult, had been made out of love and concern for their long-term stability. I then presented a timeline of the secret's impact over the years. I detailed moments when its concealment had caused tension, when minor misunderstandings had escalated unnecessarily, and when my own anxiety had spilled over into my interactions with the children. I framed these not as failings, but as evidence of the psychological weight I had carried alone. Next, I addressed the custody arrangement explicitly. I explained my desire for joint custody, emphasizing that despite the betrayal felt by Daniel, my focus remained on the children's best interests. I outlined a proposed schedule that balanced stability, schooling, and emotional needs, and I provided evidence that I could maintain this schedule responsibly and consistently. Daniel's attorney countered aggressively, painting a picture of my confession as catastrophic, asserting that the children were now emotionally vulnerable and that my actions had caused irreparable damage to their sense of security. I responded by pointing to the children's ongoing resilience, supported by reports from school counselors and therapists who noted their ability to adapt and maintain emotional health despite family upheaval. The courtroom tension was palpable. Each exchange, each objection, and each response carried weight that could tip the outcome. I remained focused, relying on preparation and evidence rather than emotion, knowing that any lapse could be interpreted as instability. I stayed grounded, reminding myself silently that the children's future depended on my clarity and composure. Hours passed in what felt like minutes, the legal arguments stretching into an exhausting blur. Finally, the judge called a brief recess before delivering the verdict. I retreated to a side room, my hands trembling slightly, my mind racing with every possible scenario. I thought about the children, their faces, their needs, and their trust in me. I prayed silently that the years of careful parenting and documentation would outweigh the shock of my revelation. When the courtroom reconvened, the judge began to speak. The words were slow, deliberate, and heavy with authority. The custody decision was revealed. Primary custody was granted to Daniel, with visitation rights structured to ensure regular contact. The court cited the emotional impact of the revelation, noting that while I had acted out of honesty and concern, the shock to the children and household stability was considerable. I felt my chest tighten as the words sank in. The legal reality was stark. I would no longer be the primary caregiver. I would have to navigate a new life where my access to my children was limited and regulated. The grief was immediate, deep, and suffocating. I struggled to maintain composure as the ruling was formalized, the terms explained, and the schedule for visitation detailed. Despite the devastation, I recognized the importance of the legal framework. I absorbed every detail of the visitation schedule, noting holidays, school events, and extracurricular activities. I understood that while my access was reduced, the structure ensured that I could remain a consistent presence in their lives. This legal structure, though far from what I had hoped, provided a foundation from which I could rebuild a relationship within the limits imposed. After leaving the courtroom, I walked into the quiet outside, the city air feeling both sharp and liberating. I thought about the 7-year secret, the years of silence, and the moment of revelation. I reflected on the cost of honesty, the irrevocable consequences, and the painful reality that some truths, no matter how necessary, carry consequences that cannot be mitigated. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. I found a small apartment that could accommodate visits with my children, arranged my work schedule to ensure I could be present during the days allocated, and sought therapy to process the emotional toll of the custody loss. Each day was a balancing act, managing grief, maintaining stability, and finding ways to strengthen my connection with my children within the constraints imposed. I also worked to maintain open communication with my children's teachers and counselors, ensuring that any challenges or concerns were addressed promptly. I sought to be a supportive and consistent presence during visitations, focusing on quality time and emotional engagement. The process was painful, slow, and emotionally taxing, but it was essential to preserving the bond that remained. Over time, I began to understand the lessons inherent in the ordeal. The cost of secrecy, even for well-intentioned reasons, could be catastrophic. The act of revealing the truth, though morally justified, had unleashed consequences that reverberated across every facet of family life. I had learned that honesty, while ethically necessary, could not always safeguard relationships, and that the timing and manner of disclosure could profoundly influence outcomes. Through counseling and support networks, I began to rebuild my emotional resilience. I engaged in self-care, established routines that reinforced stability, and cultivated a sense of hope that while my family dynamic had changed irrevocably, my relationship with my children could still endure. I learned to accept the limitations imposed by the custody arrangement while striving to maximize the positive impact I could have during visitations. The emotional aftermath was compounded by interactions with my extended family. Some supported me quietly, understanding the burden I had carried for 7 years, while others sided with Daniel, perceiving my actions as a betrayal. Navigating these fractured relationships required patience, diplomacy, and a steadfast focus on my children's best interests. I learned to prioritize their well-being over personal grievances, even when family loyalty was tested. Reflecting on the ordeal, I realized that the custody loss was both a personal tragedy and a profound lesson in accountability, transparency, and the unpredictable consequences of truth. I understood that secrecy, even when maintained to protect loved ones, could erode trust, distort perceptions, and ultimately lead to outcomes far beyond one's control. I committed myself to being a consistent, loving presence during the visitations allowed, making every moment count. I created traditions, established routines, and ensured that each interaction reinforced my commitment to my children's happiness and stability. The experience taught me resilience, patience, and the importance of maintaining integrity even in the face of profound personal loss. Please tell me in the comments section if I was right or wrong to carry that 7-year secret and then finally reveal it to my husband, because this decision didn't just end my marriage. It cost me my home, turned my family life upside down, and left me fighting every day just to see my own children. I need to know your opinion.